Every ounce of psychological suffering you have ever experienced, every betrayal, every insult, every failure, relies on a single unquestioned assumption that reality is happening to you. You see yourself as a vulnerable, isolated target sitting inside a cold physical universe, under siege by competing actors. It feels undeniable. But the cognitive science, the analytic philosophy, and ancient introspective insights all point to the exact same conclusion. There is no target in the room. You are taking life personally because you are wrong about who you are. There's an old saying, those who are easily offended are arguing for a life of misery. But who is it that is being offended? Taking offense requires believing in a personal, static, separate entity called you that can be damaged. But where does this entity come from? Neuroscientist Sam Harris calls this the surface I. It is a story we stitch together from our past memories, our social roles, our imaginings about the future. We say things like, I am a father, I am a businessman, I am a wife, I am a mother, I'm a tennis player. We have all these I ams, and they're built from the memories of who we see ourselves to be. Those memories are just that, memories. Those ideas of the future are just that, ideas. Interestingly, what that means is the person we think we are is really just a story we tell ourselves. And most neuroscientists agree with Sam Harris here. Our personal narrative, our idea of being a person, is really just a construct, a story we tell ourselves. But Sam Harris will also point out that consciousness is actually the only thing we can know for certain is real. Take away all those stories, take away all those feelings and thoughts, empty everything out, and you're still left being aware. Everything we know about the universe, we know through our consciousness. We may study things, we may do experiments, but it is our consciousness that is aware of this. So Sam Harris argues that the only thing we really know for certain that is real is consciousness. So if you're just a story, you can't really physically or mentally damage the story. What you really are is the awareness, the consciousness witnessing that narrative, not the story itself. Philosopher Bernardo Kastrup in Analytic Idealism takes this a step further. He argues through rigorous logic that consciousness is fundamental. As a matter of fact, he argues it is the fundamental that all of reality is built on. So why do we feel so separate? He equates that to each of us being an alter. So an alter is a psychological term used to describe things like multiple personality disorder, where one person can have several personalities that are all very different. We call those alters. He basically says that our individual selves are really dissociated alters of one mind at large, one universal mind. He says the way to picture this is think of a flowing river. And in that flowing river, it develops whirlpools and eddies. A whirlpool is a localized person. It's really just made of water. It's really just the river, but it's an eddy within that river. If you think about it, if two whirlpools come together and clash in a river, it's really just the water, the river, doing what the river does. If you were identified as Whirlpool A, you might feel attacked by Whirlpool B if you assume Whirlpool A is a separate entity, but it's not. It really is just the river experiencing a little local turbulence across two eddies within it. The ancient mystics have known this for a long time. Buddhist philosophy sees mental reality as a unified stream of consciousness, one stream of consciousness. And there are currents that flow within that stream. These temporary currents are what we might want to think of as individual personalities. They aren't really anything other but the river. They're not really anything other but the mind stream. and part of the mind stream. They aren't really separate. They're just how the mind stream flows. So there's no separate things moving through the water, moving through the mind stream. There is only the stream expressing itself as movement. So the ancient mystics, modern analytic idealism, all agree. Reality is a single mental consciousness continuum, not a collection of isolated physical objects. Which leads us to realizing that the subject looking through your eyes and the subject looking through my eyes are the same subject. It's that universal consciousness. Consciousness is the one that has the experience. What that really kind of means is when you're having personal conflict with someone else, it's kind of like universal consciousness having a little disagreement with itself across these two altars. It's a bit like your left hand arguing with your right hand. When you see it that way, it just doesn't make sense to do it. So when you see it that way, when you realize that there's only one consciousness and you are that consciousness looking through all these different altars, there's really nobody left to take something personal, which is what led Ramana Maharshi, the great non-dualist guru of the 20th century, to say when asked, well then, if this is so, if we're all universal consciousness, how should we treat others? And his response was, there are no others. Okay, so we've talked about psychological trauma. What about physical pain? That's real, right? When we experience pain, who's experiencing the pain? And here we need to separate pain from suffering. Physical pain is really just a biological signal telling your body something's wrong. If you put your hand on a hot stove and you don't feel it, you're going to burn your hand. So that's a signal saying, hey, move your hand away from the stove. But suffering is the mental narrative that follows that pain. Why did that happen to me? Why did I put my hand on the stove? I should have seen the stove there. What you're really doing is arguing for your story again. I'm not stupid. That's part of your story. I'm smarter than putting my hand on the stove. That's part of your story. That's where the real suffering starts, as opposed to just having the localized signal in your body telling you something's wrong and you need to deal with it. So the suffering we feel is actually an insult again to the story we tell ourselves, not anything really personal. And that can be very liberating. I can tell you from experience, what you think of as pain, 90% of that is the mental suffering you bring by telling another story to yourself about that pain. So what happens if your identity shifts? If you think about it, if I'm not this individual person, if that's just a story, and universal consciousness is the reality, then you are universal consciousness. We all are universal consciousness, expressing as all these altars, which means there's nothing personal left. You are not a person. You are universal consciousness, experiencing its own reality through all these different windows that we call life forms. When you understand that, your fear of death goes away because you're not going to die. Just the different altars merge back into the stream. All the personal insults that you felt, they're no longer personal because there's no person to take it personally anymore. One way to look at this is how Jim Carrey put it after understanding and realizing the teachings of Eckhart Tolle. He said, I used to be a guy experiencing the universe. Now I am the universe experiencing a guy.